Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and we have some super interesting Nintendo Switch 2 news to discuss today. Really, a lot has been coming out, there's so much going on. We have some interesting leaks that seemingly have been confirmed. We have different updates from different developers about different games coming to Switch 2 possibly in the future, and some new gameplay footage that's showing off what appears to be some impressive experiences on the console. So there is a decent amount to get into this time. But before going forward, let me simply take this moment to ask that if you do find yourself enjoying my videos, me talking about Nintendo news, rumors, and theories pretty much every day, your subscription would be greatly appreciated. Honestly, it would make my day. But let's get into it. So something that has gone on is that Nintendo yesterday just announced Forsaken 64 coming to Nintendo 64 Nintendo Classics. And this is super interesting, not only because Forsaken 64 is an interesting game from the N64 era, but also because it's seemingly confirming what we think may have been a leak from Nintendo or a very subtle tease. So as you see from this image here, as shared by Expand Dong Bonanza Arc on Twitter, a few months back we had seen from a Nintendo explanation video of the Nintendo Classics app, an update for it for N64, there are blurred out images in the background, and as you see from this image here, we were able to make out a few of them. Forsaken 64, which was just confirmed, but there were others, such as Glover, Smash 64, and Donkey Kong 64. So with the recent confirmation of Forsaken 64, it has us thinking, could it be that there was actually something truly to this blurred image and these other N64 games, and we were able to make out some of them, one of them has just been confirmed. And I think the answer is likely yes, to be honest. And what makes this more interesting, at least to me, is that we've been waiting on an update to Mario Kart World that would tie into Donkey Kong Bonanza. Both Donkey Kong and Pauline, the starring characters in Bonanza, are missing a whole bunch of costumes in Mario Kart World. They each only have one alternate costume, but all the other main characters have several. It's very peculiar unless you account for the possibility that they may be planning a Donkey Kong update that's going to include more costumes and perhaps other characters, who, by the way, we've seen in the credits, which I will not spoil here, for both Mario Kart World and Bonanza, where there could be some overlap here, suggesting there would be other characters. So it's widely believed that there's going to be a Donkey Kong update, and it's looking like there may also be plans to announce Donkey Kong 64. So there may be a little bit of a, hey, you all enjoyed Donkey Kong Bonanza? Well, guess what? Here's an update to Mario Kart World. Here's Donkey Kong 64. Oh, and maybe, like, here's another little update to Bonanza, like a free DLC update or something like that. Or maybe they even announce an expansion pass. That's a possibility. But I'll save that conversation for another day. Either way, it looks like these other N64 games are coming and probably not too far off from now. Now, something else that has popped up that I have found really fascinating is this latest gameplay for Star Wars Outlaws on Nintendo Switch 2. As you see from the gameplay, especially with this open world segment here, it looks pretty impressive for Switch 2 standards. Like, this is leading a lot of people thinking, wow, this actually looks quite playable. This looks like a decent version of the game, and it's an interesting sentiment that seems to be going on right now because there were impressions of the game that were suggesting otherwise, that the game is unplayable, that it's a complete mess, and when we actually look at the gameplay, doesn't actually seem to be the case. Like, no, it's not 60 frames per second. Yeah, it's clearly not as good looking as a PlayStation 5 version. I personally don't like how the hair looks kind of like blurry and fuzzy and you see all the aliasing. I hate it when different developers port down games or scale down elements in a game for Switch 1 or now Switch 2 and we see that the hair just doesn't look good. It's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, but still, overall, especially on the outside gameplay, once the camera pulls back a little bit, we're looking at a pretty good looking game here. And so it goes to show, yes, there can be ambitious third-party games that are coming up for modern platforms that can also come out on Switch 2 and be decent versions as well when you account for the fact that it's a portable handheld device. It's not going to be as powerful as a big gaming rig or even a PlayStation 5, but is it still pretty much the experience you would get, just at a lower frame rate, a lower resolution, but still pretty good? It's looking like it. But the main point to be made here is that with what we're seeing so far, there are some quality third-party games that seem to have solid versions on Switch 2. And there may be another on the way. Aesthetic Gamer, also known as Dusk Golem, who a lot of people are saying has a history of knowing what's going on with Resident Evil, is saying this. I won't beat around at the bush. Resident Evil Requiem should be releasing on PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch 2. Seems this was kind of known behind the scenes and in the grapevine. I'm not the first person to say this publicly actually, just corroborating. Talked about it with 5 different people in the last few weeks, and know another guy with a good reputation said as much less than a week ago. So not from me, but I have been hearing the same thing. Unsure if it'll be at launch, and my guess is it'll be different version with different tech, sort of like the 360 PS3 and Wii PS2 era, since some features of Requiem like ray tracing are focused on modern platforms. But if the question is it happening or not, the answer pretty much is, yeah, it's happening. So something I want to clear up here in case some people are confused or may not know, the Switch 2 is capable of ray tracing. So ray tracing may still be in a Resident Evil Requiem on Switch 2, because they may opt to not focus on that given the power of the platform, but it is theoretically possible to have ray tracing effects on Nintendo Switch 2. Now what's also interesting about this thread here is that friend of the channel, Reese Kiwi Talks Riley, also corroborates this information, at least a little bit. Just to somewhat corroborate, I have also heard of a Switch 2 version existing for Requiem, but I haven't heard anything about a PS4 version. So that's cool. It looks like, according to both these people and others, Resident Evil Requiem is on the way to Nintendo Switch 2. Now, this is a rumor, but it's a believable one. And I'm a big fan of Resident Evil, so I would love to see this come. And what I find a little bit more interesting about this is that we've recently heard about something else from Capcom, about another big game that could come to the platform. So we've heard recently from the producer of Monster Hunter Wilds, Ryozo Tsujimoto, that, well, he said that's literally this right here. Of course, with relation to platforms for Monster Hunter Wilds, we have nothing extra to announce beyond what's already out there. But we're also kind of in the same position everyone else is with the Switch 2. It's such a brand new announcement, and we would need to take time over the coming future to learn exactly the nature of the hardware and how we'll be using it best, and that's something that's going to be in the future for us. So it sounds like they are considering bringing Monster Hunter Wilds over to the platform. Recently, they've also talked about how they would like to see Monster Hunter Wilds be more successful than it already is, so bringing it over to Switch 2, a Nintendo platform where Monster has seen a lot of success on Nintendo, makes a lot of sense. As much as I would like to see Monster Hunter Wilds come to Switch 2, and it does sound like it's at least in the conversation here, now that the game is out, what my mind is sort of leaning more towards now, like what I personally want to see now, is a ground-up version of Monster Hunter for Switch 2. Monster Hunter Rise I actually preferred over Monster Hunter World, and Rise was made ground up for Switch 1, so what could Capcom do with a ground-up Monster Hunter for Switch 2? I'm not exactly sure how they're going to be handling things now, but given the popularity of Monster Hunter on Nintendo platforms, it might make sense to think that they would still be working on a dedicated version for Nintendo, and maybe how it works, the other versions eventually make it over to Switch 2, and then the same thing applies in reverse. The grounded version of Monster Hunter for Switch or Switch 2 is brought over to other platforms later on as well. Timed exclusivity. But continuing this conversation about impressive third-party games on Switch 2, Attack the Backlog actually teased this podcast he's putting out. He put out a little bit of a clip to tease it, where he is conducting an interview with the lead writer and narrative designer of Chronos, Gregor Zlyk, and here he talks about the power of Switch 2 and how he was really impressed with Cyberpunk and he's pleased with Chronos on Switch 2 so far. And so this is another example of developers feeling pretty good about Nintendo Switch 2, being impressed with the hardware. And what I want to stress here, and I feel like this is something else that's overlooked, is that yes, the Switch 2 is not as powerful as a PlayStation 5 or a Series X or the most up-to-date PCs. The reason developers are excited about Switch 2 is that the Switch 2 is powerful enough to realize the visions of these games in a way that is at least solid enough for the masses that would have the Switch 2, as we just talked about with Star Wars Outlaws. So we just have overall more good news when it comes to third-party things coming to Nintendo Switch 2. Now on that note, we've recently gotten a little bit more hope about some other big third-party games that could come down the road to Switch 2. So Sandfall Interactive was asked about Clair Obscur Expedition 33 coming to Switch 2 actually a while back, and they didn't deny the possibility, but they were asked again, and this is what they said. We have some possibilities that we will explore, but we can't confirm anything at this time. So it sounds like they are certainly considering it, and that's all they're allowed to say at this point in time. I doubt they're going to confirm that Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is coming to Switch 2 through an interview. What they're more likely going to do is perhaps have it announced in a Nintendo Direct. Will it show up in the next Nintendo Direct? That's hard to say. It's certainly possible, but it could also be something that happens way later, like 6 months from now, a year from now, or 2 years from now. Regardless, it does seem like there is some optimism to think that it will eventually make it out to the platform, and we really don't know a timetable, so don't take what I'm saying here to mean anything negative. We just don't know. But something that is positive is that we have recently heard from Ubisoft that they are working on multiple Rayman projects here. So Rayman's actually been out of the loop for a little while. It's exciting to hear from Ubisoft that Rayman's going to be making a comeback. Moving on to our last story of the day though, as Stealth shares here on Twitter, we got some interesting updates from Bloomberg. They put out an article, and according to their sources, Nintendo repeatedly pushed back plans for Switch 2's launch after its designers to perfect the games that would accompany the new hardware. So I find this interesting that Bloomberg is saying this for a few reasons. One, it's more corroboration from what we heard over a year ago. When we go back to March of 2024, we had heard that Nintendo was about to reveal the console. Nate the Hate had reported on it. We thought we were about to see the console, and then we got reports shortly afterwards that no, Nintendo has pushed it back. But we did not know the reason why. The reports were uncertain. And so a lot of people didn't want to believe these reports because they weren't officially from Nintendo. Technically, this is a rumor, right? But it's not officially from Nintendo. It's from a reputable site, so you know, some people take it seriously, but just because a site reports on something doesn't mean it's going to come to fruition. We've seen this before. The understanding is that plans change behind the scenes, but there is a large group of people who just refuse to believe these different venues because they have been wrong, or their information was outdated. That all said, when we consider this, I find it interesting because I would assume that the games that would have led to the delay of the Switch 2 would at least in large part be Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza, the first two big games from Nintendo coming on the first 2 months of Switch 2. And we've learned from the Ask Developer interviews, officially from Nintendo, that both these games were in development throughout the entire Switch 1 era, basically, for almost 8 years, about that. So to think that the devs needed more time to make sure these games would be ready for the launch of Switch 2 is kind of hard to believe. However, I also consider that back in 2015, Shigeru Miyamoto, the father of Mario and Donkey Kong, did tell us that Pikmin 4 was nearly complete. In 2015, the game didn't actually come out until 2023. So what does that mean? That Miyamoto lied to us? No, I don't think he lied to us. I think what happened is that plans changed. Very similar to how all these different credible sites heard about certain things from behind the scenes, reported on it, plans changed, and so what they reported on didn't turn out to happen as they had heard. And so when it comes to Pikmin 4, they pivoted and sat on the game for several years before they came back to it and worked on it in full to make sure it would come out for Switch 1 towards the end of its lifespan. And I think that's probably basically what happened with Donkey Kong Bonanza and Mario Kart World. They initially started off as Switch 1 projects, but as they talked about in these Ask Developer interviews, they realized that the scope of these games and what they wanted to do with these games couldn't be done right on Switch 1, so they waited for Switch 2, and so I assume, this feels like a fair assumption, and I'm sure many of you will agree, that they didn't have all hands on deck for Mario Kart World or Donkey Kong Bonanza throughout the entire Switch 1 era. They likely took a step back for several years, only had some people tinkering with some things while they worked on other projects, very similar to Pikmin 4. And so perhaps once we were approaching the time where Nintendo would start actually investing more time and resources into Mario Kart World and Bonanza, back in 2024, the devs told Nintendo that they still needed more time, so they pushed things back. And I suppose I should also note that maybe it wouldn't have even been Mario Kart World or Donkey Kong Bonanza. Maybe it was supposed to be 3D Mario, and they pushed that even further back. Maybe this also ties into Metroid Prime 4. There was a lot of talk that maybe Metroid Prime 4 could be a launch title or a launch window title. However, it still hasn't come out. We still don't have a release date. We expect it to come out later this year. And what's interesting about this is that the Metroid Prime official art book was supposed to come out back in June, was delayed to late October, around the window of time where we're expecting Prime 4 to come out, either late October or early November. Not confirmed, there's speculation, but I think we'll find out in about a week and a half when the game is actually releasing. Point is, there may have been some wiggle room here, and it's certainly super interesting to think about how things may have been moved around, how long Nintendo's been working on these different projects, and everything else we talked about today regarding all these different big third-party games and how they may be coming or how they're running on the platform. And also some more exciting N64 games that could be coming in the not-so-distant future. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.